for many years, China was a technological follower that was trying to catch up with the United States. But now that it's become essentially competing with the United States in terms of who's the technological leader, how do you think or expect this to intensify an unfriendly technological rivalry?
Yeah, as you mentioned that nowadays in many fields, China's high-tech productions catch up with US high-tech production. And I think this is a very good thing for China. Our confidence recovered and rise up very, very quickly because in the past 7 years, when President Trump launched a high-tech war to China, contain Huawei company and a lot, and I think this is a very serious, very huge competition, high-tech competition happened in the past 7 years. But in my opinion, the high-tech products are not inclusive to the United States. The US cannot monopolize the research and the development and the productions of all high-tech products. None can it profit excessively from a monopoly on high-tech. None can it weaponize high-tech to suppress other countries, including China. So I think the competition in high-tech should be fair and market-based. As an emerging economy, China has achieved a technological breakthrough in more and more fields through continued increasing in technological investment and research. This is perfectly normal and this is perfectly successful. I think China has not stolen, none seized, none engaging in colonialism. So the US has no reason to accuse China of being, as you mentioned, unfriendly or anything else. Some voice I heard in US newspaper or US media, they claim that China is stealing American technology. I think this view is also unfair because I give you a very interesting example. In history, everyone knows in history that paper making, the compass, and the gunpowder were invented in China more than 1,000 years ago. And later, the US and the Western country adopted these inventions and propel the technological revolution. China didn't presume the US for stealing China's technology in ancient age, right? Similarly, China is now innovating based on existing American high-tech products and technology, even surpassing in the US. For example, in high-speed railway infrastructure, in the EV car, in solar energy. As this is an action that benefits humanity and promotes the development of human civilization. So I believe that the current high-tech competition between China and the US is normal. China scientists are adopting to this competition, and China China social scientists are also viewing this competition rationally. We should not judge this competition through an ideological lens. The US should not use political means, especially financial sanctions, territorial jurisdiction, and technological blockades to respond to China's technological competition. On the contrary, I think the US should embrace this technological competition with a more open mindset. I think the technological competition should be healthy. The results of the technological competition between US and China, I think in the future, will ultimately benefit all of the humanity if we have the rational competition of high tech.
I think that's a very sound point. Technologies do spread. They're supposed to spread, and of course, this can be a very positive thing as well.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I would even say that the competition between the United States and China, if it's managed in a yeah in a good manner, it could be very good for the world actually. Because when you have only one center of power, one dominant states that controls technologies, it has the ability to slow down the proliferation, that is, to make sure that the technologies do not spread fast. In other words, they can extend this first mover advantage of the innovator. However, once you have two or more technological leaders, there's a tendency for the technologies to spread much faster because whoever wants to essentially appeal to the wider world, there has to be incentives such as technological transfer. You see this now with the recent Russia-India partnership as well in the military technologies, that the Russians are willing to transfer a lot of technologies to India, so the Indians prefer the Russians over the Western partners. So again, it did well. Of course, weapon technologies, one can argue, is not always great to spread, but overall, the spread of technologies should be seen as something creating more equality or equity around the world. Now, but I do think that what's panicking the US though is that realistically now they can't compete properly with China anymore, and I think it's this fear that it's not stable, that they're falling behind. They have a very rent-seeking economy, which makes it very expensive to produce things. And also, because China is such a massive industrial powerhouse, it can implement all its new technologies like AI on a massive scale and make money. I think in the US, in the panic of the competition with China, they pumped in a lot of money, for example, in artificial intelligence. There's been a lot of malinvestments, creating a massive AI bubble. And now, of course, they don't have the same ability to make that money back. So now you end up in this situation where the U.S. government, who accuses China of having state managed capitalism, the U.S. government now will have ownership in tech companies. So there's this. It's not that much consistency though. But it is interesting where this competition goes. My point is it can have both benefits and disadvantages. But I also wanted to move on to the financial area though, because you also write about the de-Americanization in the financial space. That is, how can China then diversify away from the U.S. Financial instruments of power, and but also there's always an interest. But many people assume that the Chinese just want to get rid of the dollar, if not sink it. But to what extent do you think China still has an incentive of using the dollar as well for its own interest? That is.
Mm. Yeah, it's very, very important for de-Americanization in financial sector. I think I don't know whether you know that in the past 7 years, over 2,000 Chinese companies have been subjected to the U.S. financial sanctions. These financial sanctions are illegal and have only increased resentment among all Chinese people towards the U.S. financial hegemony, promoting them to seek effective way to circumvent these sanctions. And on the other hand, China take more countermeasure to make U.S. pay the necessary price for its financial sanctions, thereby defending China's national interest. On the other hand, China also reduced its reliance on the US dollar, adopting more de-dollarization measures in bilateral trade cooperation with other countries, and promoting reforms of the international financial payment system. And this is a less countermeasure against the US and more an action forced upon China to defend its own interest. And everyone knows that the current dollar hegemony is more detrimental than beneficial to the world. Yes, I admit, after the end of the World War II, the dollar hegemony did have its contributions, playing a certain role in the international financial stability. But now it seems that the dollar hegemony is the biggest obstacle to the reform of the existing international financial, economic, and trade system. The whole world should reduce its reliance on the US dollar to reduce financial risks and the risks of being subjected to the dollar sanctions. You, just now you mentioned about the Russia issues. If you ask the Russian people, every Russian people, they will answer you that right. We need to reduce the financial dependence on US because the US use the financial weapon to deter Russia, right? So I believe that in the future, the diversification of the international finance and the international monetary system will be more conducive to the economic development and the social stability of various countries. So I predict that by 2035, dollar hegemony will further crumble, and the internationalization of the RMB and the internationalization of the other currency will continue to increase, and more countries will reduce their reliance on the US dollar. I think this is the necessary trend to the future.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned all these illegal sanctions because there's a common argument in the literature that a declining hegemon will always face a dilemma. That is, how does it transition, or what does it do now? Because on one hand, it can facilitate this transition to a multipolar system and then preserve the financial stability, or alternatively, it can try to hold on at least to its hegemonic position by sanctioning rising powers, essentially weaponizing dependence on its financial instruments of power. But then it will only encourage the rest of the world to decouple faster. And you mentioned Russia because Putin made this comment that he told the Americans, well, we never actually implemented a policy of decoupling from the dollar. It was America that decoupled us from the dollar. So, you're the one forcing this through. But, even if the sanctions are over tomorrow, the Russians will never again trust Western currencies or Western banks, Western payment systems, insurance systems, or any of the sort. So it is very destructive that the US went with the second path. I think it's a bit in human nature, perhaps. Nobody likes to see their hegemon go away and they want to preserve it. But I think now the amount of self-harm is dangerous because the de-Americanization of China, I think it could have been a mild rebalancing, but instead now we're going to see possibly China treating the dollar and US banks as threats, and something to avoid at all costs, which is, it's hard to see why this would be in the US interest.